Welcome to Renegading, the talk show which allows us to think differently. One of the most divisive terms in the English language today is the phrase conspiracy theory. Its stigma has a chilling effect on people, and the label subtly has the power to shut down inquiring minds and with them any inconvenient conversations. This hackneyed expression is used liberally by the establishment and by the media. It's a lazy way of pigeonholing the things that are perhaps too uncomfortable to believe, don't fit a prescribed narrative or a personal worldview. But where did the term come from, and how does this catch-all phrase affect independent thinkers, international debate, and the media today? Mark Crispin Miller is a professor of media studies at New York University. He's also the author of the book Fooled Again: How the Right Stole the 2004 Elections. Interested in his insight and meticulous approach, the Renegading team travelled to New York to catch up with him. When he published that carefully referenced book, he was shocked by the extreme response. He was either totally ignored or branded a conspiracy theorist. So he began to research the historical context of the term and how and where it originated. I began by asking him to define what a conspiracy theory really is.
It's difficult to define without adopting the pejorative use of the term. It is a smear. It's a meme that's used deliberately to define a particular notion or a kind of inquiry as insane and dangerously so, right? And it's interesting to look at the history of the meme in order to understand where it came from and what its purpose really is.
What is the history? Where did conspiracy theory come from?
I did a book called Fooled Again, which is about the theft of the 2004 election. And when this book came out in 2005, much to my dismay, it was either ignored or viciously attacked, mainly on the left, as conspiracy theory. I was kind of gobsmacked by this because it was actually a very careful, thoroughly documented work on an important subject, and here it was being classed as like the X-Files. So I decided to look into the history of the phrase conspiracy theory, because it seemed to me that it couldn't always have been used by journalists in this way. And indeed, one finds when one looks at the archive of the New York Times, Time Magazine, the Washington Post, that the phrase conspiracy theory wasn't used much until 1967.
What happened?
What happened was the CIA sent a memo to all station chiefs abroad in the early part of 1967. The occasion for this memo was the fact that a number of books had come out recently, most notably Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane, demonstrating very convincingly that the Warren Commission report, to the effect that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman, that report was absurd, that whole narrative was full of holes, and that we needed a new commission. In response to that crisis of confidence in this august body that had put out this report, the CIA basically kickstarted a propaganda drive to tar these authors as conspiracy theorists. And the memo even went into what we would call today talking points, specific arguments that these hacks should use on behalf of the agency, basically, so that people would not bother to take the critics seriously. For example, oh, well, if there were a conspiracy, somebody would have talked by now. Arguments like that.
So it's playing the man, not the ball. It's the ad hominem attack.
It's an ad hominem attack. It impugns the motives of the critics. It accused them of having some connection to the Soviet Union. It accused them of having a financial interest in what they were doing. It accused them of a kind of delusional commitment to a particular theory. These are arguments that are still used to this day to marginalize people who raise questions about a staggeringly long list of state conspiracies. The JFK and RFK and Martin King assassinations, 9/11 certainly, but Iran-Contra and the downing of TWA Flight 800. I mean, the list is a long one. The fact is that the propaganda drive that began that way in 1967 just continued to roll on and has continued to roll on
brilliantly effective piece.
Yes, it is a way to control public discussion. It is a way to freeze intellectual and congressional and journalistic inquiry. And what it has done, and this is really very sobering, is actually to change the way the American people regard elite power. Because historically, Americans have always been ready to suspect elites of the worst. I mean, that's what the Declaration of Independence is. It's kind of a classic of conspiracy theory, right? What George III was doing to us, so on.
What's it like being on the receiving end of being called a conspiracy theorist? Because it must be pretty lonely at times. You've laboured away, you've put a well-researched book together, you put it out there, and either it doesn't get reviewed, it doesn't get touched, worse, you get called, you get marginalised. What does that feel like?
Well, it feels terrible. It doesn't feel good. It felt a lot worse at first than it does now, because now, you're used to it. Oh.
No, it's good having a cat in the interview.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Okay.
I think he or she wants a bit of food.
No, he's 22 years old, so
is he?
He doesn't know where he is. Yeah, that's what it is. He's demented.
Poor thing.
Yeah.
So what's it like being on the receiving end of this?
Well, it feels terrible. It's not pleasant, but it's not as bad now as it was then. I mean,
why? Because you're more objective?
Well, I'm used to it. One expects it and comes to see it really as a badge of honor. And also, by now, there are so many people who have come to the same understanding of the ludicrousness of these official narratives that it's not as lonely as it used to be.
Were you shocked by the fact that it was the left liberal arm, if you like, that were attacking you, having put this out? Because ordinarily you'd think, well, it would be the right wing that would attack you very hard. They actually ignored it and left you alone and said, well, he's written a book about stealing elections. Too hot to touch.
Yeah, well, in 2005, when I was attacked by The Nation and Mother Jones, of course I was staggered and I guess you could say I was abashed. I wasn't happy about it and I didn't understand it. Now I realize that the left press has long since been, I think, systematically compromised.
Why?
Well, if you go back and study books like Philip Agee's Inside the Company, his classic account of his decade working for the CIA in South America, which even CIA people have hailed grudgingly as a completely accurate portrayal. You look at these works and you discover that the deliberate cultivation of the left and liberal press has been a kind of a basic strategy of the CIA's for a very long time. And it makes perfect sense that they would do that.
And in practice, what does that look like? How do they do that?
Well, they put people on the payroll, that's at its crudest. Or they'll, strike up friendships, that on the face of it are fairly innocuous. Often they'll simply provide the journalist with pretty hot information, give them material to use in their stories. They've done all those things here, so that I'm not going to name any names, but there's a significant number of left liberal journalists and pundits, many of them extremely famous. You could call them lefty superstars, who toe the line on all the issues that the corporate press also toes the line on, And I think most significant is the fact that on precisely those subjects that have been labeled conspiracy theory, the left has, to put it mildly, dropped the ball over the years. And this starts way back in the 60s when the left pretty much ignored the considerable evidence that it was a conspiracy that killed Kennedy in Dallas. And it's never really stopped. The same figures poo-poo any suggestion that 9/11 isn't as advertised. The left, these left figures poo-poo any suggestion that any of our elections have been stolen, unless it's Russia that did the stealing. Then the left is very quick to jump on board, if you see what I mean.
Were the two words fake news, was that the sort of conspiracy theory 2.0? Did someone try and get that to stick as a ad hominem attack? If you were believing that stuff or reporting that stuff, you're actually a bit of a loony, tinfoil hat type?
I myself have called fake news conspiracy theory 2.0.
Oh, have you?
Yes, yes.
I just want to say I haven't colluded with you.
No.
That, right? We got there independently.
Great minds think alike, yeah. No, that's exactly what it is. Fake news is a punchier version of conspiracy theory. The fake news is coming thick and fast, and it is not coming from marginal alt-right outlets. I mean, there is a lot of that stuff, sure, but that's not where the danger lies. That's not going to threaten our well-being or the survival of the species or the planet.
Where does the danger lie?
The danger lies in the fake news that doesn't get condemned as such. The danger lies in the fake news that is accepted as truth. The danger lies in the fake news that, for example, and I'm now going to make a few explosive claims, that Putin seized Crimea or invaded Ukraine. Both of those claims are false. He didn't seize Crimea. He had a referendum. A clear majority of the people in Crimea voted to stay with Russia, largely for economic reasons that make a lot of sense, and partly because the government in Kiev frightened them, because it includes some ruthless neoliberal technocrats and a number of unapologetic neo-Nazis. So the fact that the population there voted to stay with Russia makes perfect sense, and that consensus was reconfirmed in 2 subsequent opinion polls conducted by Western outlets, one of them Gallup, the other a German firm, right? And Forbes, that crackpot lefty publication, even did a piece saying it looks like the people in Crimea really did want to go with Russia. Same with the invasion of Ukraine. There was no invasion of Ukraine. None. It didn't happen. It's possible that, some of the Russian nationals who crossed the border to fight in East Ukraine have, state backing. That's possible. That's not an invasion. If that's an invasion, then we've invaded, 80 or 90 countries around the world, Those are 2 examples of fake news that could well have catastrophic consequences because they're at the service of a drive toward war between 2 nuclear powers, right? There's been a lot of fake news about Assad and the moderate rebels there, right, who are fighting in that civil war. That's fake news, There's fake news about Russia hacking the election. There's been no such attempt to hack any election. And it looks like the claim that Russia, hacked the DNC is more fake news because the evidence is pretty clear that those emails were leaked, not hacked. We could go on and on. The fact is that when Donald Trump says that there was a terrorist incident in Sweden when there wasn't, okay, everybody goes crazy here over the outrageousness of that lie. Okay, so it's an outrageous lie. What's at stake with a trivial lie like that? Is that going to put us at risk of any? No. Most of the lies Trump tells with really startling crudeness and blatancy are trivial lies, right? But in telling those crazy little lies, he allows the New York Times and the rest of them to get on their high horse and scream and yell about how outrageous and destructive this is, etc., and cast themselves as agents of the truth. And they don't have the right to do that. They are constantly spouting fake news of the most destructive kind and attacking anyone who calls attention to it, as conspiracy theorists or Russian stooges.
Welcome back to Renegade Inc., the show that allows us to think differently. Before we talk more with Mark Crispin Miller about conspiracy theories, let's have a quick look at this week's Renegade Inc. Index. As usual, we start with our favourite tweets. First up is from Russian Embassy UK. Praise God, it's not Russia this time. Referring to the Times headline where Theresa May said that Brussels is meddling in the UK election. Theresa needs a scapegoat. Second up is from journalist, freedom of the press, if it means anything at all, means freedom to criticise and oppose, which is of course the George Orwell quote, and governments should remember it, certainly on World Press Freedom Day. And from Greg Palast, pathetic, he says, #Hillary, blaming WikiLeaks for printing factual information for her losses. This is referring to, of course, Hillary Clinton coming out and saying that she takes total and absolute personal responsibility for the loss, and in the next breath, then blaming WikiLeaks, the FBI, and anyone else. Our book of the week this week is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Humans need meaning and purpose, and according to Frankl, the search for such meaning is essential to our existence. He explains how the pursuit of meaning allowed him and so many others to endure one of the most difficult burdens in human history, a Nazi concentration camp. Because he passed through some of the worst of what life has to offer, Frankl understood well that it's not circumstances that define meaning, but how we choose to cope with them. When we accept this, it is possible to find meaning and move forward with renewed purpose. A truly inspirational read. Now back to our conversation with Professor Mark Crispin Miller. I asked him about how elections are stolen, if they really can be hacked. And we also talked about how the rise of the internet has emboldened young people to have a healthy skepticism of damaging official narratives. But we started by talking about how propaganda really works.
Well, a handy definition of conspiracy theory is something that, if true, you couldn't handle it. Okay, and that speaks to the fact that propaganda succeeds by telling us what we want to hear, you know.
And that stacks up, doesn't it? Because if you have an idea, you then go onto the internet or go to wherever and you research until you find something which confirms your bias.
Exactly. Everybody does that.
Right. But no one admits to it.
Well, no one admits to it. People think they're impartial, but they're not, obviously. You have to, you know, work very hard to become impartial and genuinely skeptical. It's the hardest thing in the world, in a way. But, you know, those who do propaganda for a living, whatever they call themselves, are always careful to study the audience to see what the audience wants to hear. So you can then translate your message into terms that they will find sympathetic, even if what you're actually selling them is in their own worst interests, you know. But that's how propaganda works, and that's why it's so hard to disabuse people of certain notions, right? I mean, take, for example, election theft, right? It's one of these things I've studied. A lot of people just don't want to go there. I mean,
because it shakes them too much.
It shakes them too much. They're perfectly willing to admit that the party they're not in, or the party they don't support, has stolen elections, but they don't ever want to look at evidence that their party has stolen elections, right? Well, let's take a look at 2016 in electoral terms, okay? This was a year when election theft in the United States finally did what we students of the problem have been saying it would do all along, which is to deliver us into a very, very dangerous situation. I mean, we are where we are today, with Trump, Pence at the helm, because of serial election theft in 2016. First, Bernie Sanders was robbed of various, I think, 11 primary victories. And I mean, this has been very carefully studied and documented. There's no question about it that rampant vote suppression and computerized election fraud ensured Hillary Clinton's victory in the contest for the Democratic Party nomination. So that was stolen. Then on election day, the evidence is quite clear. Donald Trump won in the Electoral College through the use of the same tactics in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and elsewhere. All right, now, trying to get people to face this is extremely difficult for various reasons. The disappointed Bernie people want to believe that Trump really beat Hillary because Hillary did not deserve to win. Okay, I'm sympathetic to that argument because I don't think she deserved to win. I happen to think she did win, right? The Trump supporters obviously don't want to believe that because they want to think that Trump really won and that the press got it wrong when they predicted a Hillary victory, when in fact they didn't actually get it wrong, and so on, right? Now, what can everybody accept? What's the version of this story that all sides, with some exceptions, are willing to accept, and that's the argument that Russia did it. There is no evidence, there is not a shred of evidence that Russia hacked the election, and here we have to be a little bit more precise because the success of this propaganda drive is based on a certain strategic vagueness. Okay? They say Russia hacked the election. Well, do they literally mean that Russia hacked into networks of voting machines? Do they literally mean that Russia hacked optical scanners that count the votes? Well, no, they're quick to say they don't mean that. I mean, it's vague, as I say.
But is it deliberately vague? Does that ambiguity allow various meanings to be projected onto the problem?
Well, we can put it more precisely. We can be more precise about the vagueness. The purpose of the vagueness is to leave the distinct impression that Russia interfered with our election. Now, when you ask specific questions about what that means, people respond this way. Yeah. Well, they hacked the election. Well, do you mean that they hacked the voting machines? No. Well, maybe, no. Maybe they did. They could. We don't know. But we know that they got all this information about Hillary out there. And then you say, well, actually, all the evidence suggests that those emails were leaked by insiders, not hacked by Russia. Then you get the same impatient response, maybe an abusive epithet flung at you. You're a Russian stooge, you love Putin, something like that. The fact is that it is deliberately vague. It is completely irrational. There's not a shred of evidence for it. And that's, what's troubling about that is that, among other things, aside from the fact that it's false, is that the purpose of that propaganda is not to do the one thing that must be done if we're going to get out of this mess, and that is radically reform the American voting system. America's voting system is the worst in the developed world, Jimmy Carter has said as much, right? The purpose of the propaganda is not to do that. The purpose of the propaganda is to make a war with Russia that much likelier.
So, although you paint a very dark picture, or let's just say a realistic picture, for want of a better expression, where do you see it going from here?
I think that as far as this particular situation is concerned, which is to say, the attempt by the state and its allies in the corporate world to keep a lid on the truth about many crucial subjects, this is doomed to failure. It simply cannot succeed.
Why?
Because the transformation of the media through digital technology, the rise of the internet, has really changed young people in a way that's greatly encouraging, at least to me. That.
How have they changed?
Well, they're not as cowed by the official story. They're not as cowed by those who would condemn you as a fanatic and a lunatic just for looking at inconvenient truths. I can tell you as a professor, who teaches this stuff every year to a student body that's not particularly political, at least coming in, I can assure you that once they look for themselves at the difference between what they've been told, what they've been handed, and what's available out there for them to discover, counter evidence, counter narratives, once they make that discovery, once they do that comparative exercise, they're amazed and kind of exhilarated, though also frightened. And the ones who have the courage to stick with that often find themselves in a rather difficult position with their friends and family and roommates, And I completely understand because I've been there myself, but what are you going to do? You can't hide from the truth once you've seen it.
Right. You can't unsee it. You can't unthink it. You can't unlearn it.
That's exactly right.
The truth's it's a pain in the arse, really, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's really a drag. I would much rather be able to devote myself to escapist pursuits and just have a good time. But
good. Maybe you should become the celebrity editor on one of these papers. I think you'd be good.
Maybe I would. The price is right. I'd consider it. Yesterday's forbidden truths are today's orthodoxy. The fact is that what you don't know will kill you. That's a fact, If you don't understand what's happened in the past, if you don't grasp the nature of the beast that's still there, and still functioning and still wreaking havoc here and all over the world, you're at risk, You can tell yourself you're not. You can tell yourself it's fake news, you can tell yourself it's conspiracy theory, but that's whistling in the dark. And it's whistling a kind of a demented tune, you know. So people really have to face facts. That's a simple phrase, you know, a well-known colloquialism, but it's not that easy, you know. It takes a lot of work. And I think it's work that more of us had better start doing sooner rather than later.
Mark, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.